The war had lasted 937 years, 3 months, 11 days, 9 hours, and 47 minutes when the Kylthar Dominion finally reached Seoul. No one alive remembered the beginning. The Dominion itself had forgotten why it started, only that the long march must continue until every star bowed or burned. Their archives spoke of a single rebellion 9 centuries ago, a species that refused to kneel, and the decision to make an example that would echo forever. The example had grown into a religion. Their battle hymn was the sound of planets cracking open, recorded and played on loop through every corridor of every ship, so the newborn would learn fear before they learned language. Their soldiers were not people, they were instruments. Vat grown in null gravity cheershees, minds sculpted by neural lashes until the concepts of mercy, curiosity, and childhood were surgically removed. They had no names, only designations: Blade 7 Sub-11, Scourge 12 Helix 4. They died without ceremony and were recycled into nutrient slurry for the next batch. Their officers rose through ritual combat, measured in planetary body counts. The current Supreme Helix Warmaster had personally unmade 42 worlds before breakfast. On the exact 937th anniversary of the Long March, measured to the second, the Dominion arrived at Terra. The eclipse began at 9:17 UTC. 300,000 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, hulls plated in neutronium harvested from dead stars, dropped out of null space in perfect geometric formation. The shadow they cast covered half the planet in artificial night. Satellites fried from EMP alone. The moon's far side went dark as every comms array on Earth screamed and died. Tidal forces from the massed fleet lifted oceans 3 meters before the first weapon fired. From orbit, the sight was apocalyptic. The sky turned black, then violet, then the color of fresh bruises as null space rupture scars bled radiation across the magnetosphere. Children in Nova Kyoto looked up and saw the sun vanish behind a wall of alien geometry that hurt to perceive directly. The Kylthar did not bother with subtlety. Their opening broadcast was the same one they had used for 9 centuries, delivered simultaneously in 17,000 languages, including dialects extinct before humanity discovered fire. Primitive biosphere detected. Sentience level, marginal. Surrender within 1 planetary rotation or be unmade. Resistance is irrelevant. Extinction is educational. The UN War Council, huddled in a bunker under Geneva, tried every response in the book. Ely. They tried defiance. They tried negotiation. They tried uploading the complete works of Shakespeare as proof of cultural value. The Dominion answered by vaporizing the combined orbital defense fleet, 200 frigates, and a dozen railgun platforms in a single coordinated lance strike that lit the upper atmosphere like a second sun. Then the civilian channels lit up with a single voice. Old, calm, slightly annoyed, speaking English with a Louisiana drawl thick enough to spread on toast. Hold your horses, son. Give an old man 11 minutes to finish his tea. The voice belonged to Elias Gramps Moreau, 94 years old, retired gardener, widower of 51 years, grandfather of 12, great-grandfather of 31, great-great-grandfather of 7 and counting. Lived in a small wooden house on the outskirts of Nova Kyoto that still had a rotary phone because the new ones don't feel right in the hand. Spent his mornings pruning roses, his afternoons telling stories to neighborhood kids who thought war was something that happened in holo games, and his evenings sitting on the porch swing with a glass of sweet tea, talking to his wife Margaret as if she were still beside him. He was, without question, the most dangerous human being alive, because around his neck, on a simple brass chain gone green with age, hung a key no one had asked about in 70 years. The Kailthar Admiral, 7th Scourge of the 11th Helix, War Master of the Outer Veil, Breaker of 11 Worlds, assumed the transmission was a primitive stalling tactic. He had broken species that lasted centuries. An old primate asking for 11 minutes was beneath contempt. He ordered the planetary bombardment to begin. Drop pods the size of city blocks fell like black rain. Orbital lances charged with a scream that cracked continental plates. The first wave of 20 million vat-born soldiers began their descent, neural lashes singing the hymn of extinction. That was when the Marines showed up at Gramps' gate. 6 young men and women in dress uniforms, faces pale, carrying a crate older than their grandparents and looking like they were about to throw up from pure terror. They found Gramps in the backyard, kneeling in the dirt with a trowel, carefully repotting a peach sapling that had outgrown its container. "Sir," the colonel said, voice cracking, "the sky is falling. We need you." Gramps didn't even look up. "Language, young lady. The sky ain't falling. It's just having a tantrum. Hand me that watering can, would you?" Above them, the first Kailthar drop pods hit atmosphere and began to burn like meteors. Gramps finally stood, joints popping, wiped his hands on his overalls, and sighed the sigh of a man who had really been hoping to finish the roses today. "Reckon Margaret's gonna give me an earful for tracking mud in the house," he muttered. "Well, best not keep the children waiting." He looked at the colonel, at the crate, at the sky full of death, and smiled the same gentle smile he used when a grandkid brought him a broken toy. 11 minutes, you said. Plenty of time for a cup of tea first. Come inside, dears. Mind the step, it's been wobbly since the '98 quake." While the world ended outside, Elias Moreau made 7 cups of tea, 2 sugars for the colonel, none for the aides who were too nervous to drink, and 1 for himself in the chipped mug Margaret had painted with peaches 40 years ago. Only then did he open the crate. Inside was a console the size of a footlocker, vacuum tubes glowing faint blue, wires wrapped in cloth tape, and 1 red button under a cracked plastic cover labeled in faded marker. "PLA-Y." Gramps put on the headphones, cracked leather, still smelling faintly of Margaret's perfume, and spoke into the ancient mic with the calm of a man ordering groceries. "This is Elias Moreau, last custodian of Project Hearthfire. Authentication. The peaches are ripe. Margaret still hates the weeds, and the dog's name was Buster. Initiating sequence. Tell the kids I love them, and tell Margaret I'm sorry about the roses." Then he pressed the button. Somewhere under every mountain, under every ocean, under every cornfield and cemetery and playground on Earth, something older than nations woke up and began to sing. 11 minutes had begun, and the longest war in galactic history was about to end on a porch in Nova Kyoto, with a cup of tea going cold and an old man humming a lullaby his wife used to sing to their first grandchild. Because sometimes the most terrifying weapon humanity ever built wasn't a bomb. It was a grandfather who still remembered what love felt like, and he was about to share it with 15 billion souls who had never been loved a day in their life. 11 minutes. Plenty of time. Elias Moreau's kitchen smelled of peaches, pipe tobacco, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists in houses where someone has lived long enough to stop rushing. The 7 Marines stood awkwardly, filled the small space, helmets under their arms, eyes wide. Outside, the sky had turned the color of a healing bruise. The first Kyothar drop pods were already carving glowing scars across the stratosphere, each one carrying 1,000 vat-born soldiers who had never known a mother's name. Gramps moved like time didn't apply to him. He set the kettle on the ancient gas stove, the one Margaret had refused to replace because electric don't taste right, measured loose-leaf tea with a spoon bent from decades of use, and hummed "You Are My Sunshine" off-key while the world ended. The colonel, Captain Aisha Rahman, 32 years old, 3 combat drops against pirates, currently wondering if she was having a stroke, finally found her voice. "Sir, Mr. Moreau, the aliens have begun planetfall. We have maybe 9 minutes before they reach population centers. Project Hearthfire." Gramps raised one-handed a tray of biscuits from the oven, peach turnovers, still bubbling, slid them onto a cracked ceramic plate painted with dancing pigs, and set it in the center of the table. "Help yourselves. Baked 'em this morning." Margaret always said company should be fed before business. One private actually reached for a turnover before a sergeant elbowed him so hard he saw stars. Gramps chuckled. "Relax, son. Sugar keeps the nerves steady." Learned that in 48 when the levee broke. He shuffled to the crate the Marines had carried in like it was radioactive. The stenciling had faded to ghosts. PROJECTHEARTHFIRE FINAL CUSTODIANOYDONOTOPENUNTILARTHFALLS. Gramps popped the latches with the ease of a man opening a lunchbox. Inside, nestled in foam yellowed by time, lay a console that looked like it belonged in a museum. Vacuum tubes the size of soda cans, cloth-wrapped wires, mechanical dials labeled in handwriting. A pair of leather headphones hung from a hook, still smelling faintly of Margaret's rosewater perfume. And in the center, under a plastic cover cracked with age, one red button the size of a peach pit. The colonel whispered, "Sir, the failsafe requires dual authentication. We have the military key, but the civilian key." Gramps pulled the brass chain from under his shirt. The key on the end was small, worn smooth, the kind that used to open diary locks. He held it up to the light. Margaret kept the romantic. Said if the world ever ended, only love should be allowed to push the button. He smiled at the memory. She wasn't wrong. He inserted the key beside the red button. It turned with a soft click that sounded like a sigh. The console woke up. Tubes glowed faint blue. Dials twitched like sleeping dogs dreaming. A single green light began to pulse, slow, steady, the rhythm of an old man's heart. Gramps sat in the creaking wooden chair Margaret had painted sky blue 50 years ago, put on the headphones, left ear only, because the right one had died with her, and adjusted the microphone that still had a piece of duct tape holding the windscreen on. Outside, the first Kyothar landers were touching down in the Indian Ocean, raising steam plumes visible from orbit. The colonel checked her watch. 7 minutes until they reached land, sir. Gramps nodded, took a final sip of tea, and spoke into the mic with the same voice he used to read bedtime stories. "This is Elias Moreau, last living custodian of Project Hearthfire. Authentication phrase, the peaches are ripe. Margaret still hates the weeds, and Buster's buried under the swing set with his favorite ball. I'm sorry it took so long, old girl. Initiating full broadcast on my mark. He looked at the Marines, 6 terrified children in uniforms too big for the moment, and winked. Tell your moms I said hi. And don't let the dog eat the turnovers. Then he pressed the red button. The house lights flickered once. The kettle gave a soft, final whistle. And every quantum tuner buried beneath Earth's skin, under Kilimanjaro, under the Mariana Trench, under the cornfield, where Gramps and Margaret had their first kiss, under the cemetery where she now slept, woke up and began to sing. Not with sound, with memory. The song was 94 years of one ordinary, stubborn, loving human life, distilled into pure resonance. The smell of peach turnovers on Sunday morning, the weight of a sleeping grandchild on an old man's chest, the sound of rain on a tin roof while Margaret hummed in the kitchen, the way her hand felt in his, the night she forgot his name but still knew the shape of his fingers. The song rose through bedrock, through magma, through the bones of continents. It rose into the sky like dawn made of heartbreak and hope. And 15 billion Kyle-Thar warriors, who had never been sung to sleep, never been told they were enough, never been loved a single day in their brutal lives, heard it for the first time. 6 minutes remained, but the war was already over. It just hadn't realized it yet. T plus 0.0 seconds. The button clicked. Every quantum tuner on Earth, 42,000 nodes buried under mountains, oceans, deserts, and backyard gardens, locked into perfect phase and began to sing at 7.83 AZ, the exact frequency of a human heart at rest and in love. The song was not sound. It was memory, weaponized. T plus 0.73 seconds. The first Kyle-Thar drop pod, designation Ravage 9 Cluster Alpha, was 30 kilometers above the Pacific when its entire complement of 2,000 Vat-born soldiers froze mid-descent. They had no childhood. In 0.73 seconds, they received one. They remembered being 7 years old, skinning a neon gravel, and an old man with gentle hands picking them up, brushing off the dirt, saying, "Ain't no shame in falling, child, only in not getting back up." They remembered the smell of peaches and the warmth of arms that asked nothing except that you be okay. Their neural lashes, the implants that kept them obedient, sparked, overloaded, and died. Their weapons powered down. The drop pod drifted sideways like a leaf and settled gently into the ocean. Across the planet, 20 million drop pods did the same. T plus 3.11 seconds. The memory deepened. 15 billion Kyle-Thar minds, minds that had known only pain algorithms and kill imperatives, were suddenly flooded with Sunday mornings. Fresh bread warm from the oven. A dog named Buster chasing his tail in circles. An old woman with silver hair rocking a baby to sleep while humming "You Are My Sunshine" off key, but perfect. The Dominion Fleet's fire control network registered 15 billion simultaneous targeting errors labeled unresolved emotional anomaly. The admirals tried to override. Their overrides were ignored by crews who had just remembered what it felt like to be proud of something that wasn't destruction. T plus 11 seconds. The memory became specific. Every Kyle-Thar felt the exact same moment the night Margaret died. They felt Gramps sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while the monitors slowed. They felt her fingers go slack, felt the exact second her breathing stopped, felt the way Gramps leaned forward and whispered, "I've got you, love. Always will, even though she could no longer hear him. They felt the ache that never quite left his chest, but never made him bitter, either just gentler, slower to anger, quicker to offer a biscuit and a second chance. 15 billion warriors who had never cried learned how in the same heartbeat. T plus 33 seconds. The flagship Eternal Scourge lost attitude control. The Admiral, 7th Scourge of the 11th Helix, breaker of 42 worlds, dropped his ceremonial blade. The blade clattered across the deck, and no one moved to pick it up. He was too busy tasting peach jam for the first time and realizing it was the best thing he had ever put in his mouth. He tried to give the order to open fire on the planet. His voice came out as a broken whisper. Mother. T plus 1 minute 47 seconds. Across the fleet, Kylthar began to sing. Not their battle hymn. Gramps' lullaby. 300,000 dreadnoughts, weapons cold, drift engines idling, began broadcasting, "You are my sunshine," in 15 billion slightly off-key voices across every channel. The harmony was terrible and perfect. On Earth, people came out of bunkers and looked up at a sky full of silent alien ships, singing a children's song back to them. T plus 4 minutes 12 seconds. The first Kylthar soldier landed not in a drop pod, but on his knees in Gramps' backyard. He was 9 feet tall, plated in obsidian power armor, built to kill continents. He crawled through the petunias on all fours, helmet retracted, face wet with tears he didn't understand, and laid his plasma lance at Gramps' feet like a child offering a broken toy. Gramps looked down from the porch, tea still in hand. "Well now," he said gently, "ain't you a big one? Come sit. Mind the roses." T plus 7 minutes, 19 seconds. The entire invasion force, 300,000 ships, powered down weapons simultaneously. The eclipse over Earth began to break apart as ships drifted into parking orbits like ducklings looking for their mother. Every external speaker on every ship played the same loop. "We do not understand. We have only known void. Please teach us." T plus 9 minutes, 49 seconds. The Admiral's personal shuttle, a craft that had glassed 11 worlds, landed so gently in the backyard it didn't even crush the mint patch. 7th Scourge stepped out barefoot. He had removed his armor somewhere over the Pacific because it felt wrong to wear it near children, and walked across the grass like a man approaching holy ground. He knelt in front of the porch steps, 9 feet tall, reduced to something very small, and asked in a voice that had never known softness, "How do we stop hurting?" Gramps set his tea down, stood up with creaking knees, and offered the only answer he had ever needed in 94 years. "Start by helping an old man weed the roses. Then we'll talk about saying sorry." T plus 11 minutes, exactly. The war that had lasted 937 years, 3 months, 11 days, 9 hours, and 47 minutes ended. Not with a treaty. Not with surrender terms. With an old man handing a 9-foot-tall alien warlord a trowel and pointing at a patch of dirt where the petunias needed saving. The kettle was still warm, and for the first time in 9 centuries, 15 billion souls who had never been loved learned that the universe contained such a thing as mercy. It tasted like peaches. It sounded like an off-key lullaby. And it began, of all places, in a backyard in Nova Kyoto, with dirt under alien claws and tears watering the roses. 11 minutes. That was all it took. Because sometimes The deadliest thing humanity ever built wasn't a weapon. It was a grandfather who refused to let the galaxy forget what love feels like. And love, given without condition, can stop anything, even the end of everything. T plus 11 minutes and 11 seconds. The backyard of Elias Moreau's little wooden house had never held so many people, and it had certainly never held so many 9-foot-tall former planet killers. The Admiral, 7th scourge of the 11th helix, once the terror of 42 civilizations, knelt in the petunias with a trowel in his shaking claws, trying to dig a hole no deeper than 3 inches without murdering the roots. Every time he pressed too hard, a purple petal fluttered down like a tiny surrender flag. He looked on the verge of tears again. Gramps watched from the porch steps, sipping fresh tea. Easy, son. Dirt's patient. So are flowers. So should you be. The Admiral nodded, swallowed, and tried again. This time, the hole was perfect. He placed the rescued petunia in like it was made of glass, tamped the soil with the gentleness of someone who had never been allowed to touch anything gently before, and sat back on his haunches. Gramps smiled, the way he smiled when a grandchild finally tied their shoes. Good, now water it slow. Roots drink, they don't drown. Within 20 minutes, the backyard was a quiet riot of activity. Kyle-Thar warriors, some still in partial armor, some who had stripped to the waist because the sun felt good on skin that had never seen it, moved in careful, reverent silence. One squad leader used his plasma lance as a stake to prop up a drooping tomato vine. Another, a being who had personally cracked a moon, was on his knees beside a 10-year-old human girl, learning how to deadhead marigolds without crushing them. The girl's mother watched from the fence, too stunned to speak. Someone found the garden hose. Someone else discovered the joy of spraying a friend in the face with cold water and being laughed at instead of executed for insubordination. Laughter, actual, helpless, belly-deep laughter, rolled across the yard like a new kind of weapon. By the 1-hour mark, the entire street was full. Shuttles landed in perfect rows along the road, engines cooling with soft sighs. Kyle-Thar emerged barefoot because Gramps had declared no boots on the grass. You'll compact the soil. They carried seedlings in their claws, tiny trees grown from worlds they had once burned, offering them like guilty children bringing apples to a teacher. Gramps accepted everyone. He found space in the vegetable patch, under the peach tree, along the back fence. He directed traffic with the calm authority of a man who had spent 70 years telling grandchildren where to put their muddy shoes. A Kyle-Thar engineer, once responsible for weapons that unmade stars, asked in a whisper if he could build a trellis for the roses. Gramps handed him chicken wire and a pair of pliers that had belonged to Margaret's father. The engineer held the pliers like they were sacred relics and spent 6 hours building a trellis so delicate it looked spun from moonlight. By sunset, the backyard had become something between a refugee camp, a nursery, and a church. Kyle-Thar sat cross-legged in circles, listening to human children read picture books aloud. Others rocked, crying babies, their own tears falling because they finally understood why the infants were afraid. One squad had discovered the porch swing and took turns pushing each other higher and higher, shrieking with delight every time the chains creaked. Gramps moved among them with the teapot, refilling cups that had never known anything gentler than recycled nutrient slurry. An officer, rank markings still visible on his stripped torso, asked, voice small, "Will you teach us how to bake the peach things?" Gramps handed him Margaret's recipe card, written in faded purple ink. "Start with love," he said. The rest is just details. That night, 15 billion Kylthar slept on Earth for the first time. They slept in parks, on rooftops, in football stadiums turned into campgrounds. They slept under the stars they had once darkened, wrapped in blankets given by humans who hours ago had been hiding in bunkers. They slept smiling, because for the first time in their lives they had dreams that weren't kill orders. The next morning, the rebuilding began. Kylthar engineers, who could build a fleet in a month, asked permission to fix power grids. They did it in a day, then asked what else needed doing. Gramps sent them to orphanages, to hospitals, to schools with broken playgrounds. Within a week, the former Dominion fleet had become the galaxy's largest volunteer corps. They planted orchards on every continent. They learned to make peach jam so good it caused diplomatic incidents when visiting diplomats tried to steal jars. They sat in classrooms beside human children and learned to write their new names, names they chose themselves, clumsy at first, then proud. The admiral, who had taken the name Samuel Petunia Moreau, because Samuel meant heard by God and petunias were the first thing he ever saved, spent every morning in Gramps' garden, learning how to graft peach trees. Every evening he asked the same question: how do we say sorry for 937 years? Gramps' answer never changed. Keep showing up. Keep planting. Keep choosing gentle when it's hard. That's how sorry works. Years later, when people asked how the longest war in history ended, veterans on both sides told the same story. It ended with an old man handing a 9-foot-tall alien warlord a trowel and saying, "Start here." It ended with tea getting cold while former enemies learned how to hold a watering can without crushing it. It ended with dirt underclaws that had once cracked planets and with the smell of peaches on the breeze. Because mercy, it turns out, is just love with dirty hands. And love, given one seedling at a time, can grow an entire galaxy back from ash. The kettle stayed warm for the rest of Gramps' life. And the roses, those poor crushed petunias, bloomed like they had never been afraid. Elias, Gramps Moreau, lived to be 127. He never left the little wooden house on the edge of Nova Kyoto. The galaxy came to him instead. Every spring, on the anniversary of the day the sky learned mercy, the backyard filled with beings who had once been the terror of the stars. 15 billion Kylthar, now farmers, poets, teachers, and the galaxy's most overprotective grandparents, arrived in shuttles painted with flowers instead of weapons. They brought seedlings from worlds they had spent decades healing, jars of jam that caused riots at interstellar bake sales, and children, their own children, born free, with names chosen for joy instead of function. The yard had grown. Gramps sat on the same porch swing, creaking gently, hair gone snow-white, hands still steady enough to graft a new tree before breakfast. Samuel Petunia Moreau, once 7th Scourge, now head of the Galactic Horticultural Society and proud wearer of a straw hat 2 sizes too small, pushed the swing with one careful claw while telling the same terrible joke he told every year. An old human woman, the little girl who had taught Samuel how to deadhead marigolds 73 years ago, sat beside Gramps, holding his hand the way Margaret used to. Her name was Aisha Raffman Moreau, now retired Marine Colonel turned children's book author, illustrator of the best-selling series Gramps and the Gentle Giants. The ritual was always the same. At 9:17 exactly, the minute the eclipse had begun all those years ago, Every Kyle in the orchard stopped whatever they were doing and stood very still. 15 billion voices, scattered across 100 worlds but linked by tradition, began to sing. Not the old battle hymn. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Their voices were deeper now, richer, shaped by decades of lullabies sung to sleeping babies instead of planets burning. The harmony still wasn't perfect. Kyle throats were built for war cries, but it was perfect in the way only love can be. Gramps listened with his eyes closed, rocking gently until the last note faded. Then he opened his eyes, looked out at a sea of faces that had once been weapons, and said the same thing every year. War's easy, kids. Living afterward, that's the hard part. But look at you lot. You're doing fine. Now pass the biscuits before they get cold. The biscuits were peach cobbler filled, Margaret's recipe, baked by Samuel's own claws at 3 a.m. because Gramps likes them fresh. They told stories after that. Stories of the first awkward year, when Kalthar tried to learn bedtime routines and accidentally read Goodnight Moon in BattleCon. Stories of the great jam flood of '89 when someone misread cups as gallons. Stories of the day a Kalthar child asked Gramps why humans cried when they were happy, and Gramps answered, because joy's heavier than sorrow, sweetheart. Takes stronger hearts to carry it. They told the story everyone already knew by heart. How one old man pressed a red button and gave 15 billion murderers a childhood in 11 minutes. How he taught them to plant instead of burn. How he never once raised his voice, never once asked for thanks, never once let them forget that mercy isn't weakness. It's love that's learned how to be brave. When Gramps finally died, it was under the oldest peach tree on a warm spring evening. He was 127, surrounded by more grandchildren than he could count, human, Kalthar, and every beautiful mixture in between. Samuel held one hand, Aisha the other. The swing creaked softly behind them. His last words were quiet, meant only for the tree and whoever was listening beyond the stars. Tell Margaret the peaches are ripe. And the weeds finally gave up. They buried him beneath that same tree, no casket, just wrapped in the quilt Margaret had made the year they were married. The roots grew around him like an embrace. The tree bloomed the next morning heavier than it ever had, pink and defiant and impossibly sweet. The Kalthar still come every year. They bring their children, their children's children, seedlings from galaxies that now know peace because one human refused to let the universe forget what love feels like. They sit under the peach tree that is older than most civilizations, eat biscuits that still taste like Sunday morning, and sing the lullaby that ended the longest war in history. And every child, whether they have scales or skin or crystalline wings, grows up knowing one unbreakable truth. Never make an old human press the red button. Because sometimes the strongest thing in the universe isn't a fleet or a weapon or a warrior. Sometimes it's a grandfather who remembers how to hold a broken world gently until it learns how to hold itself. The kettle is always on. The peaches still bloom. And somewhere, in the soft breeze that moves through the branches of a tree that has never known winter, you can still hear an old voice, warm as summer, saying, "You're doing fine, kids. Keep planting. Love grows slow, but it grows forever. That, little ones, is what humans do. We don't always win with fire. Sometimes we win with memory." And memory, given freely, watered with tea and stubborn hope, can outlast anything, even the dark between stars. Now drink your peach tea before it gets cold. Gramps hates waste,